Well, I am really glad to see you all here because this sermon series could have gone really badly because you might have all come up with a really good reason and not shown up. We're going to start a 3-week series called 3 Great Reasons Not to Go to Church. Getting to church can be a challenge, can it? Especially if you have little kids. Back in the day when I was an associate pastor, we had 3 little kids. So we're talking, toddler age. And the church that I was serving at had an early service that started at 8:15, which meant that staff needed to show up at least an hour before that. And because Burnett came with me, that meant kids had to be up really early on a Sunday morning. And getting little ones out of bed bright and early was kind of a challenge until we figured out Sugar Cereal Sunday. One day a week, every kid got to pick any kind of trashy sugar cereal they wanted, and it was Sunday morning only. We had Fruit Loops and Apple Jacks and Cocoa Puffs and you name it, it was there, and kids would bound out of bed at 6 a.m. heading for the sugar. So we'd fuel them all up on this stuff and then hand them to their Sunday school teachers. It was great. What do you do when they get bigger, though? Because it gets harder to motivate them to get out of bed. Maybe you saw in the news this last week that there was a single mom that had that very problem. She had an older teenage son. It's Easter Sunday morning. She wants him to get up and go to church with her, and he does not want to get out of bed. And finally, in frustration, not sure what else to do, she comes up with a pretty surefire plan. She left the room, and she came back with a taser. Her son was shocked by her behavior. Well, I'm not recommending that you use a taser to get your loved ones to church, but it's not just kids that have a hard time getting up in the morning and getting going. In fact, Washington State consistently comes up as one of the least churched states in the Union. Back in the 2000 census, out of 50 states, we came in number 45. Now, we got better. By 2010, we were number 40, so that's improvement. Oregon is 49. And consistently, ever since 2000 and through present, the state of Maine takes the place for 50th state in the Union for church attendance. In Washington State, about a third of our residents say that they are members of some type of congregation. That could be anything that calls itself a religious institution, but about a third of us say that we're part of some kind of a church. That 1 in 3 ratio means that if you are a church attender, chances are that the people living on both sides of you on your street don't go to church. And the question is, how come? And that's the question I asked all of you to ask your friends, neighbors, family members who don't attend church, just to find out, why don't they go? And there were lots of answers that came in. I so appreciate everyone that participated in this, and I've tried to take all of those responses and pick out the 3 that were the most common. When we talk about the church, that can be a very generic thing. It can be just any kind of a religious institution, but the kind of church that I'm thinking of when I talk about the church is a group of people that are committed to following Jesus Christ, caring for each other, and trying to live out his teachings in their own lives and within their community. When we talk about the church, sometimes theologians talk about the church universal versus the church local. The church universal would mean, as Christians, all of those globally who would proclaim themselves to be followers of Jesus Christ. But of course, you can't really get together with everybody in the whole world on a Sunday morning, and so there is the church local. It is those small local groups of people that gather together. And a person doesn't need to be part of a small, local, formal church to be part of the global church. You can be a follower of Jesus Christ without going to a particular church on a given Sunday. But when you look at the teachings of Jesus, when you look at the scriptures, you'll find that there is this model, this expectation that those who follow Jesus will gather together, will involve themselves meaningfully with like-minded followers of Jesus, to join together for worship, for fellowship, to make ourselves accountable to each other and to qualified leaders, a place where we can use the gifts that God has given us to build each other up and to be built up. Now, my guess is that your non-church attending friends don't think about church in such theologically expansive terms. The way they look at church is it's kind of like a club for religious people. And we go to the club, and that's fun. And a couple times a year, we put on some kind of a big musical program that's fun to check out too at Christmas and Easter. And that's really all that church means. When people shared about why they don't go to church on a regular basis, I have to tell you that some of the responses were actually quite heartbreaking. And we're going to talk about that on another Sunday. But I really appreciate everyone that took time to actually give responses. And the one I want to talk about this morning is number 3 in popularity, if you will. We'll do number 2 next week, and then number 1. This represented about 12% of the responses that came in. And I actually thought the number was going to be higher, but I think it is an excellent reason not to go to church. And the reason is this: I don't believe in God. That's a pretty good reason not to go to church. I came across this from Alice in Wonderland. Remember Alice in Wonderland? She's in that really crazy place, and she meets the Queen, and she has this conversation with the Queen. "I can't believe that," said Alice. "Can't you?" the Queen said in a pitying tone. "Try again. Draw a long breath and shut your eyes." Alice laughed. "There's no use trying," she said. "One can't believe impossible things." "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the Queen. "When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." For a lot of people, talk about God falls into the category of impossible things. And I just can't believe in impossible things, even if I close my eyes and take a deep breath. This is Scott Corbett. Scott worked for a number of years to finally get his picture on his driver's license with this spaghetti strainer on his head. If you do a little searching on Google, you'll find there are a number of other people that have also gotten their pictures now on their driver's license wearing spaghetti strainers. And you might say, what is up with the spaghetti strainers? Well, it's because Scott wants to declare that he is a member of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Now the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, they also call themselves Pastafarians. It's really a dig at organized religion, because he thinks that people that believe in God, that would engage in worship of a deity, might as well believe in the flying spaghetti monster. What I find interesting when we talk about unbelief is the depth of emotion that comes up sometimes. I personally don't believe in the flying spaghetti monster, but I've never wanted to get my driver's license picture taken with broken spaghetti noodles in my mouth to make a point out of it. And sometimes people, the way they react when you talk about belief or unbelief, it seems to indicate that there's more at stake for them than just the fact that they have a dispassionate unbelief. I think there are a lot of different reasons, different kinds of doubt why people push God away. The most straightforward is intellectual doubt. I have honest intellectual questions. I have reasons why I'm not sure that this being God may really exist. But there are other kinds of doubt as well. There is wounded doubt. There are people who have grown up around religion, and yet the religion they grew up around, there was abuse. There was pain, there was manipulation, and all of that got wrapped into one snarl, and the only way they know to break free of the pain is to push it all aside, and God goes with it. We're going to talk about that more in a week or two. And then there is rebel doubt. Sometimes the rejection of God is rooted really in the desire to throw off constraints. I want to do what I want to do, and I think God is going to get in my way. And so one way to get rid of God is just to say, I don't believe he's there. So there is rebel doubt. There's also distracted doubt. That is where a spiritual life falls into decay through inattention. There are just other things that I'm busier with, that seem more fun, that seem more profitable. And what happens is that faith dies more of atrophy than it does agnosticism. Then there's what I would call peer doubt. That is, who you hang out with makes a difference in if you believe and how you believe. We know that people who have maybe grown up in what we call the Bible Belt may have faith simply because that's the environment they grew up in. Everybody went to church. Everybody said they believed. Everybody's a social Christian. But just as you might say that you're a Christian because you grew up in the Bible Belt, there are people who adopt unbelief simply because they live in Silicon Valley. And that's the hip thing to do there. And all your friends think that people that have faith may be weak or crazy or something, and so it's easier to go along to get along. Neither one of those is sufficient grounds for either belief or unbelief. What we believe about God should not be conditioned based on just where I grew up or who I happen to work with. But there is peer doubt. The final one I would put out there is fear doubt. For some, there is the fear that if there is a God, and if I were to make myself accountable, I don't know what he's going to ask me to do. This might really ruin my life. And so the safety barrier is to keep doubt in place. As long as I can hold God at a safe distance, then maybe I won't be accountable to him. I think those are all really understandable issues. I think it's important that we examine what may be underpinning the doubts that we have. Because some of us, even if all of the intellectual issues were taken care of, we would still struggle. Not because there isn't evidence for God, but because there are these other factors that cause us to shrink back. People's impressions oftentimes keep them from really understanding what's going on. A lot of you know that one of the ways I'm involved in the community is I act as a chaplain for the sheriff's department. And so chaplains get called when there are traumatic incidents happening. A few weeks ago, I got called to the scene where a person had died in their home, and a relative was there. I showed up. I'm in my full chaplain uniform, and this person was in a back room at the house, so I came in, and my job is to help them, to help them emotionally deal with the issue, to help find resources to take care of them. Person steps out of this back room, they look down the hall, they see me, and they see the uniform. And what they said was, it was a 2-word comment that I won't repeat here on a Sunday morning. And they stormed out of the house. Now, she didn't know anything about me, really. She didn't know why I was there. She didn't know what I had come to do for her. All she saw was an image that, for whatever reason, she reacted very negatively to. All she saw was that uniform, and she reacted and stormed out. And I think that sometimes that can happen to people when it comes to God. As soon as they hear the word God, as soon as someone talks about faith, there's a bunch of images or past experiences or prejudices or whatever that leap to the front, and all the walls and defenses go up, and they don't even stop to say, well, who is that really? And what does he really want to do in my life? So, if talk of God gets your blood pressure rising, first off, I'd like to thank you for being here. I know that there have been folks inviting friends to come, and if you're one of those people and you took the risk to come, and you're one of the folks that says, this is like a really intimidating place for me to be, I think the walls are going to fall down because I'm sitting here. We used a good architect, we're going to be fine, okay? No walls will fall. But I want to thank you for coming. I'm a friend. I come in peace. I understand a lot about doubt. I have walked through a lot of doubt in my own life. A writer named Timothy Keller encourages people to doubt their doubts. What he means is, think as critically about your own questioning as you do about the things you question. What I want to do this morning is help you to consider again considering God. Now, quick word to those that share my faith in Jesus. This is going to be a slightly different talk. I am talking first and foremost to friends that don't yet embrace the Bible as a significant source of truth. And for that reason, I'm not going to use a lot of Bible verses. I think for all of us, we should be careful sometimes how we discuss our faith with others, because we don't respect honest questions sometimes with the answers we give. You ever heard someone give the bumper sticker answer, God said it, I believe it, that settles it? That really doesn't settle it for someone who doesn't share your faith. About the only thing it does is it convinces them that you're probably some kind of naive dogmatist that's never thought about the issue yourself. So I want to share some things this morning that I hope may help you think about faith from a fresh perspective. Reasons to consider again, considering God. The Apostle Paul wrote in a letter to some people at Rome this. He said, God's invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. If he's right, then a good starting point, if we're going to think seriously about the question, is God there? Is there anyone, anything to believe in? Would be to take a look at the world around us. There are two competing views as to how the world came to be. The first is that it's just the result of random chance. Inanimate matter, through no divine plan, no outside intelligence, simply over time, through chance, organized itself to bring us to the point we are now with this world. The other major view is that what we see is the result of intelligent design. Now, I'm not going to argue this morning for any specific viewpoint as to how the design happened, how long it took, how long ago it happened. We can get caught up in all those debates, but what I want to ask is a more basic question, and that is, the world around you, do you believe that it happened purely by chance from unintelligent, inorganic matter, or does it show evidence of design? Oftentimes, people come to this discussion with an artificial ground rule that skews the answer before they even start. The rule goes like this. Any explanation that includes God can't be right. Tim Keller again. It's one thing to say that natural science is only equipped to test for natural causes and cannot speak to any others. It is quite another to insist that science proves that no other causes could possibly exist. See, if we come into it with our mind already made up that whatever the answer is, it can't be God, we're sort of like a detective that shows up at the scene of a crime, and before he's ever taken a look at any of the evidence, boldly proclaims, well, one thing I know, the butler didn't do it. That's not a good way to investigate anything. And the fear is often expressed that if we bring God into the discussion, that we are simply going to invoke a God of the gaps, as it is said. In other words, anything that I don't know a naturalistic explanation for, then in just kind of a cheat on the system, I just shove God in there, and I just use him to fill in the gaps. And that really science can fill in all the gaps without any reference to God. But could I just say in all fairness, I have heard some very creative explanations from materialists that have explained to me how various aspects of life came to be for which they have absolutely no proof, but they have an amazing story about how it all just happened. And I think there is just as much danger that we can insert a Darwin of the gaps as there is a God of the gaps. So the first consideration I would put out there is, how did we come up with first life? Now there's another question that lies even behind that we're not going to talk about this morning, but that is first matter. How do we end up with anything to create anything? Right? Where did matter come from to begin with? There's a mind blower for you. But let's just start with the question of first life, because if there was no life, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Ralph Muncaster wrote a book called A Skeptic's Search for God, and he broke it down to this very simple formula. He said, if life occurred by chance, then evolution equals cause. All right, a mindless process would be the cause if that's how life came to be here. If life happened by design, then God would be the cause. If God is the cause, then God is real. Now the question is, how do you prove it? Because you see, no one has ever been able in a laboratory to prove God creating life out of nothing. Might I also suggest to you that no one in a lab has ever been able to create life out of inorganic matter. So if no one can do this in a lab, if that can't be done, what do we have to do? Well, at that point, we're forced to consider the probabilities. We're forced to use reason as opposed to experiment. Think about this little bacterium. Some people think that a bacterium was the very first thing that happened in terms of life. Well, how did that thing get there? How did it get to be alive? And that's a very complex thing in itself, but let's just think about the molecules that make up that bacterium. And let's just think about the simple thing of getting them oriented in the right order. Okay, we're not going to ask how the molecules got there or how molecules came to be, or just getting them in the right order. What are the odds of that happening on its own? Now, scientists lots of times throw out giant numbers using the power of 10, right? It's 10 to the 350th power, and we have no idea what that means. So let me give you this that to me was helpful to just kind of wrap my mind around the probability of something like that happening. Ralph Muncaster again. He says that the odds of winning a typical state lottery with a single ticket are about 1 in 10 million. The odds of assembling simply the correct molecular orientation for the first bacterium would be like winning more than 4,700 state lotteries in a row with the purchase of a single ticket for each. Does that help put it in perspective? Antony Flew was the son of a Methodist minister in England. He attended C.S. Lewis's lectures at Oxford. But Flew himself rejected belief in God. In 1950, he wrote an essay called Theology and Falsification, which for the next 50 years became the most widely published publication on the topic. He was considered the leading proponent of philosophical atheism. That was until 2004. In 2004, he announced that he had come to the conclusion that there must be some divine being. And he wrote a book that shocked everyone. There is a God. He was influenced heavily by this whole thing of the improbability of life arising from inanimate matter. The longer he worked with it, the more he looked at the science, the more he came to the conclusion that it just couldn't have happened. And he offered this little, here's a quote. He says, "Living matter possesses an inherent goal or end-centered organization that is nowhere present in the matter that preceded it." Does that make sense? So it's like life knows where it's going. It's like it's after something. There's a goal, and yet the stuff that it came from didn't have any goal. It didn't have a to-do list. It didn't have an agenda. It didn't know the final destination, and yet it seems like life keeps moving toward this destination aggressively. And then he offers a little thought experiment. He says, think for a minute of a marble table in front of you. Do you think that given 1 trillion years or infinite time, this table could suddenly or gradually become conscious, aware of its surroundings, aware of its identity the way you are? But if there is a divine designer, an intelligent cause agent, then the existence of life, its organization, its complexity, would make sense as a natural outflow of the nature of that being, one who is the very source of life. Consideration number 2, the laws of nature. A number of years ago, when I was running my medical equipment business, I was asked to bring a piece of equipment out to the Forks Hospital for an early morning procedure. So I got up at dark 30 and headed out to Forks, and I got out there. When I pulled in, they said, "Oh, didn't they call you? That procedure got canceled." Okay, guys, thanks. So I jump back in the truck and I head home. Now I get back to about Indian Valley. You know where that is? The other side of Lake Crescent. Long, straight stretch. When I had driven out that morning, everything was fine. Just the roads were kind of wet, no problem. I'm coming back within an hour, and I'm on the same stretch of road, and there's a logging truck in front of me that's going really slow. And so I pull out just to go around him. Long, straight stretch, nothing in front of me. As I get up alongside of the truck, I accelerate a little bit, and the rear end of the truck broke loose. Because in the little bit of time that I'd been gone, the temperature had dropped a few degrees, and now I was on a sheet of ice. I whipped back and forth, tried not to go underneath the truck, instead went over the embankment about 11, 12 feet down and rolled the truck. When I got a new truck, I got one that has a thermometer up in the mirror, because I suddenly realized how much I wanted to know what temperature it was outside. In fact, my thermometer has this cool little symbol that pops up whenever the number 32 arrives. That little snowflake shows up next to it. Now, why do you think the product designers at Toyota felt that they could put a little snowflake next to the number 32 whenever it shows up? Well, because they know something about what we call the laws of nature. They know that whenever it reaches 32 degrees Fahrenheit, if there is water around, it's going to freeze. And when water freezes, vehicles tend to slide off the road. And so they put that little symbol in there. Now the question is, why do these norms exist? We take them for granted all the time, that it's the way the world works. We talk about the laws of nature, that there isn't really a written down law. It's the way things normally work, but we consider it to be ironclad. Toyota doesn't say, well, maybe at 45 we should throw the snowflake up there because maybe it's going to freeze a little different today than it did yesterday. They go, no, it's always going to be at 32 degrees. Why do these norms exist? Why are they so mathematically precise if our world is simply a chaos of mindless matter? I find this interesting that mathematicians have discovered things about our world that haven't even been discovered yet with math. Think about that for a minute. There is like a mathematical formula flowing under everything around us that we can discover that tell us about things we haven't even discovered yet. John Barrow, in his Templeton address, said, "There are mathematical equations, little squiggles on pieces of paper that tell us how the whole universe behaves." Stephen Hawking said, "The more we discover about the universe, the more we find that it is governed by rational laws." Anthony Flew says that these regularities are mathematically precise, universal, and tied together. Einstein spoke of them as reason incarnate. The question we should ask is how nature came packaged in this fashion. Or Einstein himself. "I am not an atheist. We are in the position of a little child entering a huge library filled with books in many languages. The child knows someone must have written those books. It does not know how." Consideration number 3. We know what we don't know. Where'd my quote go? Come back here, quote. No, that's not it. Here goes Albert again. We know what we don't know. Robert Spitzer. Human beings seem to want to know just for the sake of knowing, and seem to be endowed with a desire for complete explanation. They recognize when they have not arrived at this point, indicating that they are already beyond the answer at which they have arrived. Do you follow that? Humans have the remarkable capacity of knowing that they do not know. And yet one must ask, how is this possible unless they have some awareness of what is beyond what they already know? When our grandkids come to visit, they get into everything. They start exploring corners. And the question that little kids always ask you is why, right? Why? 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 It's never one why. There's a chain of whys. Why is that? Because they know that even when you've given them the answer, they know almost intuitively, yeah, but there's something else you haven't told me yet. I don't know what it is, but I can already conceive that there is another part to this answer. Why? Now, we have a Chihuahua, which is like a dog, that has lived with us for 14 years. There are parts of my house that dog has never investigated, has no interest in. It's never smelled food there. It's never tried to open the drawer. It doesn't care. It doesn't want to know why. Maybe how, maybe what, but not why. Why is uniquely human. And we know that we don't know a lot of things. How do we have that kind of awareness if we're simply the mindless product of a mindless universe? And how about our hunger? We hunger for things that we've never experienced. You ever thought how odd that is? Now, when I finish speaking, I will have preached 2 times, and I'm going to be hungry. And I'm going to be looking for lunch. And the good news is lunch does exist. All right? When I get home from work sometimes in the evening, even if I'm not consciously aware that I'm hungry, Burnett will point out to me that I am pacing around the kitchen as she's getting dinner ready. There's a built-in hunger in me that's looking for food. And food really does exist. But there's another set of hungers I have that are just as driving, just as compelling in my life, and yet they're things that I've never really experienced fully. Why do I have hungers for things that this world can't fully provide for me? Robert Spitzer suggests 5 hungers that are unique to humans. We hunger for ultimate truth. We want to know what is true. We hunger for ultimate love. How many people do you know that jump from relationship to relationship because they keep saying, this one is going to be it. This is going to be ultimate love. What gives us the idea that such a thing could even exist? We look for ultimate goodness. Every social justice warrior out there wants the world to be right. But where do we get the idea of right in a relativistic world? We long for ultimate beauty, and we long for an ultimate home. Timothy Keller says that we have a longing for joy, love, and beauty that no amount or quality of food, sex, friendship, or success can satisfy. We want something that nothing in this world can fulfill. Isn't that at least a clue that this something that we want exists? Madalyn Murray O'Hair made herself infamous as America's chief atheist. She started the American Atheist Association. And yet, written throughout her diary, after she died, they found written repeatedly this phrase: somebody, somewhere, love me. We long for ultimate things that this world never fully provides for us. How about human rights? I know many kind-hearted, justice-seeking people who would identify themselves as unbelievers. What I find interesting is not that they're such nice people. I'm truly glad that they are. The question that pops up in my mind is, why do they work so hard, even selflessly, to create a better world? If in fact the whole thing is just winding down to go back into the cold, mindless vacuum of space. Vladimir Solovyov, a Russian philosopher, made this sarcastic summarization of secular humanist ethics. Man descended from apes. Therefore, we must love one another. Erwin Schrödinger, who developed the theory of wave mechanics, said this: "The scientific picture of the world around me is very deficient. It gives me a lot of factual information, puts all our experience in a magnificently consistent order, but is ghastly silent about all that is really near to our heart, that really matters to us. It knows nothing of beauty and ugly, good or bad, God and eternity. Well, so what? If God really is there, what does it matter? Who is he like? He, she, it. What can we know about God? I think those ultimate hungers may give us a clue. We know that we hunger for ultimate love. In the Bible, the Apostle John wrote a short letter, 1 John chapter 4, verse 8. He said this, "Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. If in fact I've been created by a God who at the core of his being is love, then it makes sense that as a being made in his image, I would hunger for ultimate love." We hunger for ultimate goodness. We know there's a lot of bad stuff in the world, and we want to see it set right. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. It's not surprising that we have an innate sense that there is a righter way the world should be, because God himself is light. We hunger for ultimate beauty. The Apostle Paul, writing to some friends in the city of Corinth, said this. He said, "No eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined what God has prepared for those who love him." Paul says that the beautiful world God has created here, God wasn't done creating. God is the author of beauty. He has called us to share in that beauty. We hunger for ultimate truth. What can I really commit myself to? What is truth? Jesus said, "I am the way and the truth and the life." Jesus lived a life and he taught in a way that he said, if you want to know truth, follow me. I will show you truth. And we hunger for an ultimate home. And one of the things that Jesus said to his followers, he said, "In my Father's house are many rooms. I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also." If that being really is there, if he really is ultimate love and goodness and beauty and truth, and one who can provide for us that ultimate home we long for, my question would be, isn't he worth pursuing? The Old Testament prophet Jeremiah, speaking for God, said, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." If God really is there, he's worthy of the pursuit. It's worth getting the answer. Jesus said, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks it will be open." If you've been afraid to ask, seek, knock, I just want to encourage you, God is not someone to be afraid of. He wants you to come to him. He wants to be found. He's worth the quest. But it brings me back to this question of, is it worth going to church? I would say that depends a lot on the church. The legal standard for declaring something a church is really pretty low. There is seriously the church of the subgenius. There is the church of euthanasia. They have kind of dead services. There are crazy churches, there are stifling churches, there are godless churches. Here's what this church believes. We believe that God is real. We believe that he has revealed himself through his Son, Jesus Christ. We believe that in ourselves we are all broken people, and there is nobody perfect in this congregation. We believe that God, at the core of his being, is love. And it's because of his love that he's made it possible through Jesus for us to live in his love. We believe the Bible is a guidebook that certainly can be abused and misused, but it's one that, when properly used, speaks to the deepest things of life. And because of that, we're committed to study and teach it well. We believe that God has called us to live as a family and that we're more effective in following Him and doing what He desires when we work on it together. And we believe that over and above our greatest desires and best efforts, we are dependent on the power of His Spirit to change us, to be, and use us to accomplish all that He's created us for. So is it worth going to church? Well, it depends on why you're there. Going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than going to a bakery makes you a donut. Although if you go often enough, you may start to look like one. If you're a seeker, if you're trying to answer these questions, church is a great place to ask questions. The ultimate questions about the one who ultimately loves us and the one to whom we'll ultimately give an account. If you have chosen to follow Christ, it takes on even deeper value. It means that we engage with others to live in love. It means that we pursue goodness together in keeping with God's good nature. We come together to worship the beauty of our Creator. We come seeking to know and to live out His truth. And we come together to support each other on the journey home. And those, to me, seem like really worthwhile things to do. Amen?